In Bernie Sanders' home state of Vermont, they shut down their one nuclear plant. Guess what happened? Their carbon emissions went up. So this supposedly green state, ultra-liberal Vermont, actually went backwards. Germany foolishly shut down a lot of their nuclear plants. So what did they wind up doing instead? They wound up burning more coal. France, on the other hand, gets more than 70% of its power from nuclear energy. They pay some of the lowest electricity rates in Europe, and their emissions are excellent.
A closer look in the United States. Over the last couple of years, really 2013, 2014, we prematurely retired 4 nuclear power plants. They were almost entirely replaced with fossil fuels. And so the consequence was that we wiped out almost as much clean energy electricity that we get from solar.
Mine all these materials for the batteries, and those mines are environmentally hazardous. Disposing of batteries is hazardous.
The ingredients to green energy, like battery packs, are anything but green.
You have to consume 100 barrels of oil's worth of energy in China to make that battery pack. But I have to dig up 1,000 pounds of stuff and process it. Digging up is done with oil, by the way, big machines.
Wind and solar and batteries now are 10 times better than they were.
And then they stop getting better because they hit physics limits.
Many electric car buyers don't realize that most of America's electricity comes from coal and natural gas.
Take enormous amounts of land. You got to clear cut the forest. These machines kill a lot of birds. I agree that we should bring down our carbon emissions. There's the global warming risk. There's also the risk that the oceans become more acidic and start killing off the plankton. But we should also make sure we're spending money on stuff that really works.
But there is one energy source that produces lots of power with no carbon emissions: nuclear power.
Nuclear is the best answer we have right now. These plants have been around since the 1960s. They work well, they're safe.
So the first thing is that clean energy has been increasing. This is electricity from clean energy sources over the last 20 years. But when you look at the percentage of global electricity from clean energy sources, it's actually been in decline from 36% to 31%. And one of those clean energy sources in particular has actually been on the decline in absolute terms, not just relatively, and that's nuclear. You can see its generation has declined 7% over the last 10 years. Now, solar and wind have been making huge strides, and so you hear a lot of talk about how it doesn't really matter because solar and wind is going to make up the difference. But the data says something different. When you combine all the electricity from solar and wind, you see it actually barely makes up half of the decline from nuclear. What about Germany? They're doing a lot of clean energy. But when you look at the data, German emissions have actually been going up since 2009, and there's really not anybody who's going to tell you that they're going to meet their climate commitments in 2020. The reason isn't hard to understand. Solar and wind provide power about 10 to 20% of the time, which means that when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, you still need power for your hospitals, your homes, your cities, your factories. And while batteries have made some really cool improvements lately, the truth is that they're just never going to be as efficient as the electrical grid. Every time you put electricity into a battery and you take it out, you lose about 20 to 40% of the power. In California, we try to deal with all of the solar we've brought online. We now get about 10% of our electricity from solar. When the sun goes down and people come home from work and turn on their air conditioners and their TV sets and every other appliance in the house, we need a lot of natural gas backup. So what we've been doing is stuffing a lot of natural gas into the side of a mountain. And that worked pretty well for a while, but then late last year it sprung a leak. This is Aliso Canyon, and so much methane gas was released, it was the equivalent of putting 500,000 cars on the road. It basically blew through all of our climate commitments for the year. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has looked at the carbon content of all these different fuels, and nuclear comes out really low. It's actually lower even than solar. And nuclear obviously provides a lot of power, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's understandable that engineers would look for a technical fix to the fears that people have of nuclear. But when you consider that these are big challenges to do, that they're going to take a long time to solve, there's this other issue, which is that are those technical fixes really going to solve people's fears? Let's take safety. You know, despite what people think, it's hard to figure out how to make nuclear power much safer. I mean, every medical journal that looks at it, this is the most recent study from the British journal Lancet, one of the most respected journals in the world, nuclear is the safest way to make reliable power. Everybody's scared of the accident. So you go look at the accident data, Fukushima, Chernobyl, World Health Organization finds the same thing. And what about the waste? Everyone worries about the waste. Well, the interesting thing about the waste is how little of it there is. This is just from one plant. If you take all the nuclear waste we've ever made in the United States, put it on a football field, stacked it up, it would only reach 20 feet high. And people say it is poisoning people or doing something. It's not. It's just sitting there. It's just being monitored. There's not very much of it. By contrast, the waste that we don't control from energy production, we call it pollution, and it kills 7 million people a year, and it's threatening very serious levels of global warming. And well, what about the weapons? Maybe the most surprising thing is that we can't find any examples of countries that have nuclear power and then, decide to go get a weapon. In fact, it works the opposite. What we find is that the only way we know how to get rid of large numbers of nuclear weapons is by using the plutonium in the warheads as fuel in our nuclear power plants. And so if you are wanting to get the world rid of nuclear weapons, then we're going to need a lot more nuclear power.
Yes, I think that nuclear power, in particular thorium reactors, need to be a big part of the energy puzzle moving forward. And that if you do want to get off of fossil fuels, that nuclear needs to be a part of it, in my opinion. And that's what the studies and research I've seen. Like, nuclear gets a very, very bad rap because we have many associations with it. But a lot of those associations are with an earlier generation of reactor. And so I know some might disagree with this, but I believe that thorium reactors in particular are a big piece of a renewable energy future.
The cause of the clean energy crisis isn't from within our machines. It's from within ourselves.